What if the opponent who had beaten you twice suddenly became the player who gave you the confidence you needed before the biggest tournament of the summer? That is exactly what happened to Alex inside Arthur Ashe Stadium, but the story is far more interesting than a simple exhibition victory. Because when Alex walked onto that court in New York, she wasn't just facing Iva Jovic again. She was facing the memory of everything that had gone wrong the first 2 times. Paris, Queens, 2 losses, 2 straight set defeats, and now, somehow, these 2 friends were standing across the net from each other for a 3rd time in 2026. On paper, it was only an exhibition. No ranking points, no Grand Slam round, no career-defining prize waiting for the winner. But Alex had a very different reason to care. Sometimes the most important battles in tennis aren't the ones that appear on the tournament schedule. Sometimes they're the ones happening inside a player's head. And Alex had a problem she desperately wanted to solve. She already knew Jovic extremely well. Their relationship went back years to the junior circuit when both were still trying to figure out where tennis might take them. Alex's 2022 US Open Junior Championship became one of the biggest moments of her early career. But the friendship between the 2 players continued long after that tournament ended. They traveled through the same tennis world, spent time together away from competition, shared meals, explored cities, and even teamed up as doubles partners. In many ways, Jovic wasn't simply another player Alex knew from the tour. She was someone she genuinely trusted and cared about. And that made their matches even more complicated. Because the moment they stepped onto opposite sides of the net, all of that friendship had to be pushed aside. Jovic once explained the feeling perfectly. When Alex wasn't playing against her, she wanted Alex to succeed. But when the 2 stood across from each other, there was only one goal: win. And Jovic had already shown Alex exactly how difficult that could be. Their first meeting of 2026 came at Roland Garros, and Alex never managed to take control. Jovic played with enough authority to keep the match out of reach, leaving Alex with another frustrating loss. But there was still a chance to change the story. Then they met again at Queens. This time, the result was even harsher. Alex fell 6-2, 6-2 in a match that lasted barely more than an hour. There was no dramatic comeback, no late surge. Jovic simply controlled the contest and never allowed Alex to find the rhythm she needed. Suddenly, their head-to-head record had become something Alex couldn't ignore. 0 wins, 2 losses, and that kind of number can become dangerous for a young player. Not because the statistic itself changes how a racket works, but because athletes are human. When you keep losing to the same opponent, you start remembering the losses before the match even begins. You remember the points you couldn't finish. You remember the patterns that trapped you. You remember walking toward the handshake knowing you still hadn't found the answer. And that is exactly why their next meeting in New York was so intriguing. There was no traditional tournament pressure, but there was something much more personal at stake for Alex. The setting couldn't have been more dramatic either. Arthur Ashe Stadium, thousands of fans, the US Open just around the corner, and Filipino supporters making their presence impossible to miss. Flags were visible throughout the stadium, and every time Alex produced something special, the noise seemed to rise another level. But underneath the excitement was one question that everyone watching could feel. Had Alex finally figured out Jovic? Nobody could erase the first 2 defeats. The 0-2 record was still there when the match began. Alex couldn't change what happened in Paris or Queens, but she could decide what happened next. And from the opening exchanges, something looked different. Alex wasn't waiting for Jovic to make mistakes. She wasn't simply trying to survive long rallies. She was stepping forward. She was taking her chances. Her shots had purpose, and instead of allowing Jovic to dictate the rhythm, Alex started forcing her friend to react. That might sound like a small tactical adjustment, but against a player who had already beaten you twice, it can completely change the psychology of a match. Every successful rally becomes evidence that the old pattern is disappearing. Every hold of serve adds another layer of belief. Every time you hit through the opponent, you begin to realize that maybe the player who once seemed impossible to solve isn't impossible after all. And the crowd noticed it too. The atmosphere inside Ash began changing with Alex's confidence. The longer she stayed aggressive, the more dangerous she looked. Jovic still had the experience of those two previous victories. She knew Alex's game. She knew where the pressure points were. But this wasn't the same Alex she had faced earlier in the year. The rallies became more competitive. The momentum began shifting. And then, Alex did something she hadn't managed to do in either of their previous meetings. She took control of the set and finished it. The first set belonged to Alex. Just like that, the story had changed. Think about what that meant psychologically. Before the match, Alex was the player who had lost twice. Now Jovic was the one staring at a deficit. The player who had always seemed to have the answer suddenly had to find one herself. But this was where the match could have gone wrong for Alex. Taking the first set is one thing. Closing out a player who has already beaten you twice is something else entirely. A sudden drop in aggression could have given Jovic a way back in. One loose service game could have changed everything. One stretch of passive tennis could have brought those old memories rushing back. Alex, however, didn't seem interested in going backward. She kept playing with conviction. She kept moving Jovic around. She kept trusting the shots that had put her in control in the first place. And that was perhaps the biggest difference of the night. Alex wasn't trying to become a completely different player. She was simply trusting the version of herself that had finally started working. The second set became less about revenge and more about belief. There was no bitterness between the two players. No personal feud, no reason for either of them to hate the other. They were friends before the match, and they would still be friends afterward. But during those points, neither player was willing to give the other an inch. That's professional tennis. You can care about someone deeply and still want to beat them. In fact, sometimes facing a close friend can make the competitive side even more intense because both players know each other so well. They know the tendencies. They know the strengths. They know the moments when the other player might hesitate. So as the finish approached, every point carried more weight. Jovic was trying to prevent the night from becoming the exact opposite of their previous meetings. Alex was trying to make sure this wasn't another opportunity that slipped away. And then the final stages arrived. Alex stayed composed. She didn't allow the moment to become bigger than the tennis itself. Point by point, she moved closer, until finally it was over. Alex had beaten Iva Jovic. The 0-2 record was gone. Not because the previous losses had somehow disappeared, but because they no longer represented the ending. And that distinction matters. The first two matches had told Alex what Jovic could do to her. This match showed Alex what she could do back. Arthur Ashe erupted around them as the result became official. Filipino fans celebrated, the flags moved through the stands, and Alex had every reason to enjoy the moment. But the most valuable part of the victory wasn't necessarily what anyone could see. It was what had changed in Alex's mind. For months, Jovic had been the player who seemed to have her number. Now Alex had proof that the matchup wasn't permanent. She could lose twice and still come back with a different plan. She could study what went wrong, make adjustments, trust her game, and produce a completely different result. That's one of the hardest lessons in professional tennis. Players don't just compete against opponents. They compete against patterns. They compete against memories. They compete against the voice in their own head that says, "You've already tried this, and it didn't work." Alex had just silenced that voice. And the timing couldn't have been better, because the US Open was waiting. This wasn't a Grand Slam match, and it would be wrong to pretend otherwise. There were no ranking points on the line. There was no main draw progression attached to the result. But confidence doesn't always come from official tournament statistics. Sometimes confidence comes from solving a problem that has been bothering you for months. Alex now had that feeling. She had walked into one of the biggest stadiums in tennis with a 0-2 record against Jovic and walked out knowing she could beat her. That matters. especially for a player whose career has been moving at such a rapid pace. The conversation around Alex has changed dramatically. There was a time when people talked about her almost entirely in terms of potential. What could she become? How high could she climb? What might happen if everything came together? Those questions are different now. Fans aren't just wondering about her future anymore. They're asking how far she can go against the best players in the world. Can she make a deep run at a Grand Slam? Can she handle the pressure that comes with being one of the players everyone is watching? Can she turn exciting moments into consistency? Those are much bigger questions, and they come with much bigger expectations. That's the difficult part of rising quickly. When you're the underdog, nobody expects perfection. But once people start believing you can win, every loss feels heavier. Every opponent becomes another test. Every tournament brings more attention. Alex is learning how to live inside that pressure, and that makes moments like this even more valuable. Because this victory gave her something that statistics can't fully measure: evidence. Evidence that she can change a matchup. Evidence that a previous defeat doesn't have to become a permanent weakness. Evidence that even when another player has figured you out, the story can change the next time you meet. And perhaps the most interesting part is that Jovic herself understood this. She knew Alex would eventually have another opportunity. That's how competitive sports work. You lose, you learn, you make changes, then one day, you get another chance. For Alex, that chance came under the lights in New York, and she took it. Now, though, comes the real test. Can she carry that belief into the US Open? Because everything changes once the exhibition ends. The friendly atmosphere disappears. The ranking points return. The stakes become real. Every opponent wants the same thing Alex wants. Every round becomes harder. Every mistake becomes more expensive. And now, Alex isn't simply trying to prove she belongs. She's trying to show that she can stay at this level. That's a completely different challenge. The higher she climbs, the more opponents will study her. The more fans will expect from her. The more pressure will follow her onto the court. But if there is one thing this night in Arthur Ashe demonstrated, it's that Alex doesn't have to be controlled by what happened before. She had every reason to remember the two losses. Instead, she used them as information. She didn't treat Jovic like an enemy. She treated her like a problem that needed solving. And eventually, she found the solution. That's why this wasn't really a revenge story. It was something more meaningful. Alex wasn't trying to get even with a friend. She was trying to prove something to herself. 2 losses didn't mean she was destined to lose again. A 0-2 record didn't decide the result before the first ball was struck. And the player who once seemed impossible to beat could eventually be beaten. Now the question is what Alex does with that realization. Because the biggest opportunity is no longer behind her. It's directly ahead. The US Open is coming, and the pressure will be greater than anything she experienced during this exhibition. But Alex will arrive with one extra piece of belief. She knows she can walk into a difficult matchup, ignore the history, make adjustments, and change the ending. Maybe that's what fans should take away from this night in New York. Not simply that Alex defeated Jovic, not simply that Filipino supporters filled Arthur Ashe with energy, and not simply that a 0-2 record became a win. The real story is that Alex confronted something that had been hanging over her and finally refused to let it define her. She lost twice. She learned from it. She came back. And this time, she walked away as the winner. The exhibition may not appear next to a Grand Slam title in the history books, but confidence has a history of becoming valuable when the pressure arrives. And if Alex can bring this same mentality onto the court when the US Open officially begins, then this night could become much more important than anyone expected. Because sometimes a breakthrough doesn't announce itself with a trophy. Sometimes it arrives as one victory over the opponent you couldn't beat before. Sometimes it happens under the lights, in front of thousands of people, with the pressure quietly building point after point. And sometimes That's the exact moment a player realizes something has changed. For Alex, that realization came in Arthur Ashe Stadium. She had been beaten twice. The third time, she found a way through. And now everyone gets to see what happens next.